So this is our next phylum that we're talking about. It's phylum Cnidaria. Yes, the C is silent, so it's not C. Cnidaria, it's just Cnidaria. These guys, you can see pictures here, they involve sea anemones, jellyfish, and hydra. This is a link. I'll put the link for this video in Schoology. If you watch this video and then complete the worksheet that goes along with it, you can receive some extra credit. The catch is I would like you to fill in the worksheet and submit it electronically to get the extra credit. I want to try to practice with online submissions, so that will serve as an extra credit assignment. So phylum Cnidaria, the name comes from Cnidaria, obviously. It's a Greek word for nettle, and if you've ever touched a nettle plant, it has little pricklers on it that hurt, and that's where this name comes from. I don't know if anybody's ever been stung by a jellyfish before. I have, and it does not feel good, so I can see why it derived its name from this Greek word. If we take a look at our evolutionary tree here, you can see that the new characteristics that have evolved are symmetrical body plan and radial cleavage, and you can see that by looking right here at these traits. So sponges were a little bit more rudimentary and primitive, and now we're evolving into more complex jellyfish and cnidarians. Here's another cladogram just of the phylum Cnidaria. These are the different classes that we'll talk about. You can see radial symmetry, they all have in common cnidocytes and planulated larvae. We'll talk about what all that is. And then after Hydrozoa, since they're the more primitive of the group, they have, the rest have septa that divide their gastrovascular cavities. Septa are just dividing tissues, basically, and kind of gives their gastrovascular cavity a little more specificity or differentiation. The next thing to evolve is the polyp stage. Actually, the polyp stage is reduced in the Scyphozoa and the Cubozoans. And then we have a medusa in the Cubozoans is cuboidal. It's actually almost a square shape, and you'll see pictures of that later. The medusa stage goes away in the Anthozoa, and I'll explain all of these terms later. You could probably come back and look at this cladogram and have a better understanding of their differences in the structures that they have. So characteristics of all cnidarians, they exhibit radial or biradial symmetry. So radial symmetry would be cutting them in half in many different directions. Biradial symmetry would be basically two different directions that they would have radial symmetry. They're all aquatic, mostly live in like salt water, but some of them do live in freshwater environments. They use gas exchange through diffusion. Obviously you can see right through some of their tissues, and they're very thin, so diffusion works very well for them. They can be sessile, free-floating, or just weak swimming. Sessile, remember, means they are attached to something and don't move. And then free-floating, you can envision jellyfish doing that. They do have tissue-level organization. Remember, sponges just had specialized cells. They didn't have tissues, but our cnidarians do have tissues. They have a primitive nervous system. They do have stinging cells. They are heterotrophic, which means they eat other organisms to get their energy, and they are ectothermic, or they just take on the temperature of their surroundings. Here's just showing you radial symmetry. What you're looking at is a polyp stage. It could be a hydra from the top down on the right hand side, and showing you how it has radial symmetry. So general organization of their bodies. They are organized around their gastrovascular cavity, and that's where their digestion takes place. They have 2 layers of cells. They have a gastrodermis that lines their digestive tract, excuse me, and an epidermis, which is their outer layer of cells. They also have something called mesoglia. This is just a jelly-like substance between these 2 layers. Give them a little more structure or support. Here's a side view with these general body structures. A gastrovascular cavity, they do have a mouth and then their mesoglia. They have different types of cells that do different things. They can have contracting cells that help them move, nerve cells that help them respond to their environment. They have cnidocytes, which is a type of cell that contain nematocysts. And I know there's very new words here, so make sure you keep cnidocytes separate from nematocysts. The suffix on cnidocyte, the cyte suffix, tells you it's a cell. And then nematocysts are kind of like little pouches, and they actually contain toxins. And this is a diagram showing you the nematocyst. There's little barbs on the outside, you can see right here, and if an organism comes by and brushes against it, it shoots out this nematocyst. Sorry, my drawings aren't very great, but it shoots out the little nematocyst, and it injects toxin into its whatever it is. It could be its prey, it could be a predator, whatever, and that's where the stinging sensation comes from, is from that toxin. So they do have something called a nerve nut. This is their very basic nervous system, and you can see it just kind of has several different cells that are all connected in a net-like structure. So cnidarians have 2 basic body forms, the polyp and a medusa. The polyp form is typically sessile. Those are the ones that are attached at the base, and then their tentacles and mouth face upward. The medusa is, for example, if you envision a jellyfish, that's the medusa body form, where their tentacles and mouth face downward. And yes, that is where Medusa, the mythical creature, got her name from, because that term refers to all these tentacles coming out of a central area. So here are the 2 body forms showing you the polyp type and the medusa type. The diagram has labeled for you the gastrovascular cavity, where their epidermis, gastrodermis, and mesoglia are. These are the basic body types that you should be familiar with, and the structures that go along with them. Okay, for nutrition, the tentacles of all cnidarians produce nematocysts. These are organelles inside those cnidocytes that can discharge threads to entangle, penetrate, or poison their prey. The tentacles are composed of cells, like I just said, cnidocytes, and they have the nematocysts inside of them. Cnidarians prey on a variety of appropriate sized prey. They're normally going to draw their prey into their gastrovascular cavity by their tentacles, and then they have gland cells that can secrete enzymes onto the food to break it down, and then they can digest it from there. Another diagram showing you up close what the nematocyst looks like. So the whole structure, if you look, this entire thing is the cell. And you can see here's the nucleus. And then this is a very large organelle, the nematocyst, but that is where it's kind of connected to the cell membrane, and that's where it's kind of located in this particular cell.
These anemones appear to be peacefully coexisting in the tide pool. All seem serene, but trouble is brewing, a struggle over a patch of rock. Splaying their tentacles, the animals detect each other. Now, there's no turning back. Each animal prepares for battle, inflating a series of sacs. Inside each sac are hundreds of thousands of weapons. It is a veritable silo of warheads loaded with toxins. But in order to deploy its weapons, each combatant must reach out and strike its enemy. And the fight begins. In slow motion, they deliver their devastating blows. Anemone battles can last for hours, even days. The fighting is brutal and can even lead to death. With each strike, thousands of poisonous weapons are unleashed, penetrating flesh, pumping soft bodies full of toxins. As the arsenal is used up, the weapon sacks are left empty and tattered. Triumphant, one anemone spreads its tentacles as though flaunting its victory. The vanquished retreats within itself and will eventually move away.
Okay, reproduction and life cycles. They have both types of reproduction, sexual and asexual reproduction. So for sexual reproduction, their gametes are shed directly into the water, and then they have to find each other. For asexual reproduction, they usually reproduce by budding. Some reproduce by fission, or just kind of dividing themselves in half. Cnidarians generally will alternate between their sessile polyps that reproduce asexually and the swimming medusae that reproduce sexually. And one of these stages is missing in many of the forms, like I showed you in the early cladogram. So this is the general life cycle of many types of cnidarians. So here you can see they have the medusa body form. They will release their eggs and sperm into the water. They have to find each other to produce a zygote. That produces a larva. The larva will find a place to attach to a substrate, making it a sessile organism. And then it grows for a while. This structure can create a small bud, and that's their asexual reproductive stage. And it can create a new colony, it can create a whole new separate organism, and then they reproduce, again, they can produce the little medusa form and then reproduce sexually. So it kind of goes around and around. But like I said before, some of these body forms are missing in some of them, and I'll explain a little bit about that later. Another picture of the life cycle. If you like this one better, you can study this one. It's got some colors. Okay, so the important classes, there's 4 of them: the Hydrozoa, Scyphozoa, Cubozoa, Anthozoa. So our first one, the Hydrozoa. Hydrozoans, such as Hydra, will alternate between body forms, and what you see here is a Hydra, and there are actually 2 buds coming off of it. There's, oh, you can't really see my pen here, but there's 2 buds coming off the side at the bottom, and then its mouth and tentacles are up towards the top. But this group also includes hydroids, fire corals, and the Portuguese man-of-war. They are freshwater and marine. Cnidocytes are present only in their epidermis, so on the outer part of them. The medusa, if that body form is present, has a muscular velum, and the velum is just the tissue that in their medusa form that helps them move. They have mesoglia without amoeboid cells. If you think back to the sponges, the amoeboid cells could become multiple different types of cells, and it kind of works the same way in the cnidarians. They reproduce asexually by budding, and they have sexual reproduction with their gametes. The gametes, oddly enough, are produced by their epidermis, and released into the water. So they kind of shed their egg and sperm right out of their epidermal layer. There are several genuses within this class that you may see these names frequently. There's the Hydra, Obelia, Gonionimus, and Physalia. And the velum is just that clear portion of their bell. It has a like muscular structure to it. The Portuguese man-o-war is also in this group. It's a cnidarian that floats in the water, has long tentacles, and its bell kind of inflates with air, which keeps it floating. Obviously, it looks like it hurts on that person's leg. Then we have class Scyphozoa. The class name Scyphozoa comes from the Greek word skyphos that denotes a kind of cup shape or drinking cup, and it kind of gives you a picture of what the organism will look like. The dominant stage for this class is the medusa form. The polyp will be either absent or just reduced. It'll occur very briefly in its life cycle. They have cup-shaped umbrellas, and this is going to include the true jellyfish. So when you think jellyfish, this is the class that they come from. Their tentacles in some of these species can be up to 70 meters in length. It's quite a long length. To give you an idea, my classroom is about 12 meters long, so just imagine how long those tentacles can actually get. Cnidocytes are present in their gastrodermis and in their epidermis. They have a thick mesoglia that have amoeboid cells. Their gametes are produced by their gastrodermis, so from the inside of them is where they shed their egg and sperm. And they are all marine. You won't find these guys in freshwater environments. Here's a genus Aurelia labiata. This is one of those glowing types of jellyfish. When you see the little tetrafish that are glowing, they've actually taken the gene from these guys and inserted it into the DNA for those fish to give them that glowing ability. Here's a diagram just showing you where they are shedding their eggs from on the inside of their gastrodermis. Here's a life cycle. They have a very short period where they have the polyp form. You can see at the bottom their larva is called a planula. Just make sure you remember that that's larva or a zygote for them. Here's another view of their life cycle and where they're attached to the substrate and how they reproduce here. So here is an up-close image of the planula larva. They're ciliated, and that helps them swim to different locations. All right, next class, Cubozoa. The cubozoans are things like sea wasps. Their dominant body form is going to be the medusa again. They're a lot like jellyfishes, but they have a cuboidal umbrella, so they're shaped in a cube-shaped structure. And some of them can be quite fatal with their stings that they have. They include the box jelly, and this is one of the most 10 venomous organisms on the planet. Here's a really cool image of what they can look like, and this one has tentacles that come out of each corner. Kind of a neat structure. These guys are all marine. They only live in the ocean, no freshwater. Strong swimmers, and they will prey primarily on fish. The stings of them can be fatal within minutes. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie called 7 Pounds with Will Smith, but that was the kind of jellyfish in that movie. If you haven't seen it, I won't ruin it for you, but it does involve this jellyfish. Here's a diagram showing their gonads, or where their gametes will originate from. Obviously, the stinging portion of them is not on their bell, because this man would not be able to hold it if that were the case. Their cnidocytes are on their tentacles and their insides. And then class Anthozoa. These polyps have a flower-like appearance. There is no medusa stage at all. They're all polyps and sessile for the most part. They are all marine, and they're found all over the world. This includes things like sea anemones, corals, sea fans, and sea whips. So here's a really cool sea anemone. These cnidarians can be solitary or colonial, so they can live in large groups like the coral, or solitary like an anemone. Some of them can produce protective skeletons. The corals are definitely good at that. Their gastrovascular cavity can be divided by at least 8 mesenteries, and a mesentery is just a dividing type of tissue. The cnidocytes are on their mesenteries, and the mesoglia does contain amoeboid cells. This is a common image. The clownfish and the sea anemone live in a symbiotic relationship. Typically, a sea anemone would sting anything that comes in contact with its tentacles, and it actually does produce a sting for the clownfish, but the clownfish has an adaptation that prevents it from being affected by those stings, so they can actually live together. The clownfish gets protection, and the sea anemone gets the scraps of food that the fish leaves behind. So we did say that in this class, the corals belong to this class, and these guys are a really important part of our ecosystem. As you probably know, they have the very hard shells, and you can see in the top left-hand picture that's a coral that's obviously not living anymore, and that's what they leave behind is their protective skeleton. Their little polyps live inside of those little pockets and can retract when they're not feeding. The corals live as an interconnected colony of polyps, and you can see in the right or the left-hand diagram how they're connected within the skeletal structure that they secrete. So here's a fun word for you. Why don't you try it first? So this is zooxanthellae. This is a symbiotic photosynthetic dinoflagellate, and this is the brown stuff that you see in there. This is an organism that lives in the corals with the corals to help them, and it provides nutrients for the coral through photosynthesis. So this is a mutualistic relationship. Just like the clownfish and the sea anemone that help each other, this is also a mutualistic relationship. When there are temperature changes in the ocean, the El Nino and La Nina, that will cause a tremendous change in the balance between these two organisms, and that's when the corals can start to die because they lose their photosynthetic friends. And like I said, coral reefs are extremely important. It takes them thousands of years to form the really big coral reefs. And they support a wide variety of organisms. They are the underwater equivalent of the Amazon jungle. They have a very high diversity of species, and there's a lot of biomass, meaning there's a lot of living organisms within the coral and the reef. Reefs can contain sponges, colonial hydrozoans, anemones, a lot of varieties of other corals, fish, types of worms that we haven't even gotten to their phyla yet, not to mention bryozoans, ctenophores, protists, bacteria. There's all kinds of organisms that live in a coral and help maintain the balance of the community there. And it's very important that if you ever are snorkeling or scuba diving around a coral reef, that you don't touch the coral because you can damage it even if you touch it lightly, and it can kill a significant amount of that area. So whenever you're swimming around a reef, just look, don't touch. So economic importance, reef building corals provide habitat for fish and other animals, and these are important food sources for us. The coral reefs are tourist attractions, and the coral rocks are used as building materials and jewelry. So when these corals do die, they harvest some of this material sometimes and make things from it. There is a Dirty Jobs episode, I don't know if you've ever seen it, where they are building synthetic reefs to help rebuild these communities and populations. Okay, so that takes us to the end of our Cnidaria phylum, and you will now take the brief quiz to see what you remember from this slideshow. So good luck.